All right, it's time to call today's Rules and Open Government Committee meeting to order at 2:01 p.m.
Candelas?
Here.
Duan? Absent? Foley? Here. Kame? Here. Cohen?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We are going to start by reviewing the agenda for next week's final council meeting of the fiscal year. It's with a scheduled closed session start time of 9:30, regular session at 11 a.m. And we have the ceremonial items still listed to be heard at 1:30. Consent starts on page 6. It continues on page 7. 8. That's what it says, but we can. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, all the way through page 24. Strategic support, section 3, we have the approval of various budget actions that will be heard before consent, along with section 3, item 3.4, the approval of annual appropriation ordinance and funding sources. Section 3. Item 3.5, heard immediately after consent, our general obligation bonds to be heard along with SJFA 1, which will come later on the agenda. Item 3.6 is a multifamily housing revenue notes for 525 Capital. 3.7 is public hearing on liens, not to be heard before 1:30. Section 4, we have our IPA annual audit. Section 8, items not to be heard before 3 of Japantown, Downtown, Monterey Corridor, Tully Road, bids, and also at 8.5.
So on 8.5, this is Tony over here.
Okay.
On 8.5, we'd like to notice that to be heard before 8.1. That has ballots that we have to count.
Oh.
So we want to be able to get sort of a jump start so we don't delay the meeting.
8.5 is a Alameda Community Benefit Improvement District.
Yes.
We will move that to
Just to be heard before
heard before 8.1,
8.1.
or should we renumber? Let's renumber.
No, I don't think we can renumber on
can't
the.
renumber?
It's because it's already been published once before.
Okay.
But we just want to start the ballot counting process early, so we don't delay the meeting, making you guys have to wait while we do that.
All right, and number 8.6, our major event zone ordinance. 8.7, our large format digital electronic signs. 8.8, safe sleeping navigation hub and motel program. 8.9, multifamily housing incentive program for Santana Row Lot 12. 8.10, Zero Sealy. I don't think either of those would have any risk of being heard before 1:30, even though they're listed for after 1:30. And we have one item on one item on land use consent, and then there is a joint City of San Jose Financing Authority agenda on page 38. Any public comment?
No public comment?
Okay, so I guess you were asking Councilmember Kamei about the 11 o'clock start time. It does seem like a long agenda.
It
And
does,
At
yeah.
risk, we don't want to take a risk of using yesterday to say, hey, we can get done quickly and then end up with a late meeting, so.
Yeah, we've got the IPA, we've got the
Digital signs,
digital signs,
yeah, a few
the
other.
bids, I mean, I think we should start at 11. Should we start closed session at 9? Do we have a lot of things on closed session?
Currently
'Cause it is the
don't.
last
I
one
believe
bef-
we only have 4 items for closed session, that are all fairly straightforward.
Okay, good, then let's keep it at 9. Yeah,
Unusual
that's-
for the
I'm
final
with you.
closed session of the fiscal year. Are you sure? Well, no, we can't be sure until Friday.
As of 2:05 on Wednesday this week, yes.
As far as the invocations and the ceremonials, that seemed to work really well, that we started them at 11. Can we do the same thing this time around?
That would be good.
Okay, because then we can just move the agenda like we did and then not break at 1:30 for the ceremonials.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine with me. I think yesterday we felt because of the length of the items that breaking in the middle was harder, whereas today, this one doesn't seem as big of a deal, but I'm okay with either way. So let's just, I think for the flow of the meeting, it makes sense to just put it at the beginning.
I do too, yeah.
Okay.
So I have one, we'll reach out to them and see if they can make it 11. I don't mind
I mean,
working.
it seemed to work well this past meeting, working through lunch. I mean, we found an opportunity to go back, or, bring it to the dais. I think we should work through lunch just to be efficient of everybody who's here to speak on different items.
We're
Agree.
totally fine with that. We just want to be able to, the clerk and manager's office just want to be able to notify staff so they can plan accordingly.
Great.
Okay.
So
Any
I-
other questions? Did you want to ask?
I was
about-
going to make a
Okay,
motion.
go ahead.
I will move the agenda with confirming the start time at 11, moving the invocation and ceremonials to 11 o'clock, and include the ad sheet. And the 8.5 being held, or being counted, being held first, conducted
Yes,
first,
so what we'll do is we'll.
prior to 8.1.
Right, we start it, then we pause it, you go on to 8.1, 2, 3, 4 while they count the ballots.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Let's vote. All right, that motion carries 4-0 with one absence. We don't have any other meetings to review, so we're going to skip on to our consent calendar. We have a large list on the consent this week, 12 items on consent. Do we have any public comment on consent?
Yes, Jordan, please go ahead and make your way to the podium.
Jordan Moldau, District 3. I had comments on item B4, which is the T&E work plan. I appreciate the commitment to Vision Zero and Climate Smart. I'm glad to see those are still coming on a semi-annual basis. One thing I noticed reviewing all the committee work plans is that all the committees except for T&E have work plan items called City Council Focus Area Status Report, where they receive updates on outcome measures and performance measures for the council priority area. And it seems that T&E doesn't apparently own any city council priority areas that appear in that fashion on the work plan. So I was curious whether that is what we want, if there's something different that we could be doing. I feel like there are a bunch of measures that belong under T&E to get, input from T&E and from the public. I feel like you could potentially do some short-term fixes where maybe in the Vision Zero semi-annual status report, you could incorporate the outcome measures and performance measures that are related to Vision Zero and traffic safety and that sort of thing. And maybe I would also ask that for the Move San Jose plan that you get some of the outcome measures that are relating to vibrant downtown and facilitation of the creation of affordable housing, because I feel like Move San Jose, transportation, affordable housing, vibrant downtown, they're all very intricately related, and so I feel like it makes sense to receive the outcome measures for those. In the medium term, I assume at some point you will be revisiting your focus areas and creating new ones, and so I'd ask when that comes around that you consider that there be a focus area that T&E is wholly responsible for that's relating to the climate and or Vision Zero.
Back to the committee.
All right. Thank you, and thanks for the good suggestions. As chair of T&E, I will make sure that we look at measures, but I also have always been frustrated that we don't have any specific measures for the environment, so we'll continue to push for that. Do we have a motion on consent?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second then.
Yeah, motion second. Yeah,
All right.
I'll move approval.
Let's vote on that. All right, motion carries 4-0. And now we're on to our two action memos. We have a memo from the mayor to reappoint our city auditor. I see our auditor in the audience, but do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, Jordan, please go ahead and make your way to the podium.
Joe and his team do great work, and I'm happy to support the reappointment. Thank you.
Back to the committee.
All right, thank you so much. I agree with the comment of the public comment.
Move approval.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I don't think this will be very difficult. Let's move on to a vote on this one, and Councilmember JUN is here to cast his vote as well. Motion carries 5-0. Congratulations, we're glad to have you back for another 4 years, Joe.
Well, it's got to go to council.
Well, I mean, that's true, it's got to go to council, but, you know, yeah, you know.
But you have 5
You only need one more vote.
Yeah.
All right, now we're on to item C2. This is the reconsideration of the temporary moratorium on smoke shops memo. We now have the early consideration response form. I don't think we need the introduction this time since we heard it last time. Do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
All right, no public comment, so we'll come back. Do you want to describe the early consideration form a little bit, either you, Lee, or Chris?
I'm going to ask Chris to go into the early consideration form.
Thank you. Chris Burton, Director of Planning, Building, Code Enforcement. I'm joined by Rachel Roberts, Deputy Director of Code Enforcement. So there's a lot that goes into this issue. There's a whole host of moving parts. It's not just the tobacco retail license. There's other products that are being licensed at the state as we speak. There's the whole conversation about retail businesses that are adjacent to sort of smoking shops or call themselves smoking shops. So there's a number of different pieces that we're considering as we approach this work. In addition to that, in moving forward, kind of a moratorium and kind of thinking about the context of that, we want to make sure that we have all the resources in place that we're able to enforce on that issue. So as we've brought forward the work analysis, we're looking at a number of different items. We've outlined some immediate steps that we think are definitely achievable, and I'm going to let Rachel talk to some of those in a moment. But then some of the items will take sort of more work. As we think about the purpose of a moratorium, you know, we need to be able to sort of, it's essentially a pause that allows us to consider more analysis and bring forward a recommendation for other changes that ultimately resolve the issue. So I want to make sure that we're set up effectively to do that. So I think we have the capacity and the scope to focus on those near-term items to sort of move towards implementation and a moratorium, but there are some sort of bigger picture items that are a bit further out that we'll need sort of to think through and potentially need more resources in the future to action on. The one thing I just want to provide as context as well, just in the sort of narrow band of the tobacco retail licenses that we issue, you know, there were changes that we implemented in the last couple of years that shifted the requirements around location, so the proximity to schools and other locations. Since implementing that, we've actually seen a net decrease in the number of licenses that are issued on an annual basis, on an ongoing basis, and we've decreased from somewhere close to 600 down to now closer to 500. And if looking at the fiscal year so far, we've actually seen a net decrease again this year. So, you know, the work that we've already implemented does continue to sort of move the needle. There's certainly a lot more we can do here, but there are a lot of moving parts. And part of this is just sort of organizing all the work in a way that we can actually approach it while still balancing all of the other priorities that City Council included in this budget as far as the re-engineering of code enforcement. So I'm going to hand it to Rachel and she can talk through some of the specifics on the near-term work that we're going to green light, and then the balance will be a yellow.
Thank you. So as far as the green lit items, we do want to move forward with the moratorium as soon as possible. But before we can do that, it's really essential that we have the funding in place as well as the staffing and enforcement structure in place in order to make that moratorium effective. As many of you know, we've been here at Council quite a few times over the past year, not only to talk about tobacco retail licenses, businesses, but also vape and smoke shops, as well as some of the other types of things where we've been seeing happening with some of these businesses, such as the hemp products that contain THC. We do recognize also there's likely quite a number of businesses out there that are already operating that are not in our TRL program as of yet. And so we have shared at prior council meetings, and then again today, that we really can't do this work without partners, such as the police department and our state partners who have already been assisting us to some degree on enforcement efforts. So our strategy in order to greenlight the moratorium would be to return to the county, because we currently have a grant in place with it's a DOJ grant administered by the County Department of Public Health to do enforcement on tobacco businesses, but that grant is currently limited to decoy operations. So we have already started the conversation with the county to expand that scope to allow us to do enforcement of the moratorium as well as just straight enforcement on these businesses in addition to decoys. That grant is good through 2026, and we do have quite a bit of remaining funding still available because our decoy program has been paused because of lack of decoys, which is a separate issue. So we do think that if we can get that amendment to the grant, we do think we should have our actual current TRL inspector will be retiring soon, and our hope would be to bring him back on as a retiree hire to help us administer that enforcement work. As you know, currently under our tobacco retail license program, and it's a fee-for-service program. So the fee we're collecting is only to be used to sustain the annual inspections and then enforcement that occurs in regards to those inspections for each TRL businesses. So we're already been operating outside of that scope to try and address a lot of these businesses, but without identifying some additional funding, we wouldn't be able to take this work further. The other piece would be setting up a memorandum of understanding with our police department partners, because they are the authority and have the jurisdiction to help us address those illegal drugs that we're encountering. As you know, some of these businesses also under stings and other operations it's been identified to carry to have guns and other things going on at these locations. So it's super critical that we have that understanding in place with our police department partners. And then lastly, the California Department of Taxes and Fees. They actually have a representative that's addressing this issue also locally, but they have also shared with us that they are understaffed at this time, but are expecting to be adding some resources also in the very near future. So we would want to solidify that partnership before we embark on this moratorium, and that the last thing we'd want is to have a moratorium that we can actually enforce effectively. So we are hopeful that we'll be able to move forward with these things quickly, sooner than later, but it is a really critical piece to have in place.
I know that Councilmember Ortiz would like to ask some questions, but I'm going to start with a couple questions. You said the number of license applications have gone down this year. These are not applications necessarily for new licenses, but they have for the renewal ongoing licenses. Is that what that means? Or is the number of licenses for new businesses as well dropping?
So this fiscal year, so since we enacted the flavored tobacco ban, we went from around 620 businesses. We're into this year, at the beginning of the fiscal year, we had about 578 businesses. Since this fiscal year began, we've had 19 applications. Some of those were for what they called an arm's length transfer, where they're just basically taking the license and going from one person to the other. We have had we're netting a reduction of 3. So we had several that withdrew, and then as we've been doing our annual inspections, we're also finding that some businesses have closed, or the space is vacant, and they're no longer obviously operating and selling tobacco. So in total, as of today, that number, the 578 number, will have been reduced by 3.
So the number of licensed businesses
Yes.
has dropped.
Yes.
Okay, but so I guess I appreciate your broad look at all the elements that go into not just managing licenses, but also enforcing the fact that there's unlicensed and unwritten businesses that are maybe not actually, that are selling off the books and not actually coming to the city. But I'm curious about just the basic question of a moratorium. As a city, we receive licenses and we know whether they're a renewal or a new business license. And so is there a complication in implementing just a moratorium on the city accepting new business licenses? That to me is a much more basic question than all the other enforcement that eventually we hope to be able to do.
So I think the key there is that it does take some work to implement a moratorium, even when as straightforward as just focusing on new businesses. We would still have to be able to make certain findings, still have to draft the ordinance amendment, and then with any moratorium, there's an expectation that there would be some sort of additional regulation that comes after the moratorium to ensure that it's effective. You know, the reason the moratorium was put into place is addressed, and so that there's an amount of work that will happen with that. But additionally, it's the moratorium would be the piece of making sure that businesses don't continue to open despite the moratorium. Because they may not come into our office to file an application.
And what is I saw in your memo it said 90-day moratorium. Is there a rule about how long a moratorium can be?
There is not. That was done just with keeping in mind that when we did bring the flavored tobacco ordinance previously, there was an extensive amount of outreach that ended up being needed because of big tobacco companies and various other lobbyists that were very concerned about this going forward, and so therefore there was a lot of outreach and education we had.
But that was for the permanent ban, not a moratorium.
Correct. So the thought was that the shorter the moratorium, the better, to avoid having to do that extensive amount of outreach and education.
Okay. Well, we'll continue the discussion. I know Lee, you wanted to make a comment or ask a question.
I just want to ask a question of staff. Chris, what goes into developing the findings to then hand to the attorney's office for an ordinance?
So with this one, it's really about the analysis that we can use to make those findings. So the original memo and some of the work that's been done by the county in their recent health assessment is a great start point, but there's additional work that we need to do to go verify that data, really understand the complications, and then sort of line it up with our understanding on where licenses are occurring so that we can make those findings to support a moratorium.
Okay. And then definitely appreciate the very thorough analysis. So the council member has asked for a moratorium, or I don't want to put words into his mouth, somewhat of a policy statement or symbolic statement. If we were to proceed with just the ordinance at this point, or the moratorium, and put that in place, we can have a discussion through next year's budget cycle on how we would actually implement something, but be able to say no to new businesses, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Ortiz, did you want to weigh in at all?
Please, thank you so much, Chair Cohen. I'm just concerned about, they're saying time, how much time? So I'd like to ask if there's a timeline on this, and, people staying back and not providing solutions is the reason why Eastside has more smoke shops than anywhere else, and I'd hate for it to take a year to get a moratorium in when the city of Campbell and the city of Richmond are able to do it much sooner. So it just makes me feel like our residents not as prioritized as residents in other cities. And I understand there's a workload, but if people are intentionally being targeted by companies that harm their health, I think that should be made a priority.
So I think we definitely would have to obviously coordinate with the city attorney's office on their capacity, but my previous conversations, we were anticipating potentially bringing something back in August and maybe September at the latest.
Okay, so
I just want to add to that, though. Obviously, there's a lot moving through our code team right now around vacant buildings, around the code re-engineering. So at some point, this is going to hit those timelines, and we're going to see impacts to other work in progress. So this is the trade-off. We have a very limited amount of capacity on policy issues relative to code enforcement. It's pretty much Rachel and one analyst. So, there is a trade-off here. I'm not debating the merits. I completely agree with the work, and this is necessary. Our challenge is, this lines up with all the other requirements that are being put on us by City Council.
And if if I could just respond. I think that's a fair point. I'm not against taking some time. I understand that Rachel and one other person are already at capacity. My whole thing is, can this be done in phases? Okay, we cannot start regulating smoke shops that are opening up that aren't getting tobacco retail licenses. But how can we do what Chairman Cohen said? When requests for new business licenses that are using tobacco licenses come forth, can we at least stop those, right? Like, how can we have a phase-in approach? I'm not expecting all this to be done, this year, but I think that if we could at least get the moratorium done, and then we could talk about in the budget cycle, identifying more resources so that we can get into the actual enforcement and the implementation of the policy. Thank you.
Yeah, so Chris, I think, and maybe how this comes together, I think that's sort of what the early consideration form does. When we say yellow light, it actually means throwing it into next year's budget process. I think your concern, Councilmember Ortiz, is if we put a moratorium in place and it's only 90 days, there's a gap between that moratorium and then the budget process then starting, which really doesn't kick off until, like, say, February or March. So I would just ask for the city attorney's office or Chris to weigh in. But if, administratively, once we have a moratorium in place for an ordinance, it's very easy with finance to put things in place. Can we just close that gap so that there isn't a daylight between those two things happening, with the moratorium being 120 or 180 days, so that we're at least into next year's budget process and we haven't had 6 or 7 or 8 more businesses come in that we need to figure out how to regulate against?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Council can, certainly set that timeline for whatever it is. I think, as Rachel was pointing out, our upfront concern is sort of the response, potentially, from the industry that comes with a longer moratorium. If that's something that, we're willing to weigh through this process, then absolutely, there's flexibility in the timeline.
Just last year, I introduced a memo to regulate smoke shops in regards to those who are selling cannabis, and I haven't seen anything done, and it's been about a year. And so I'm scared that this is going to get put on the shelf and that families on the east side are once again going to get ignored. So I just want to raise
Well, thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. I mean, I'll just ask the question. I will ask the attorney as well, attorney's office. The concern about the gap, I think, is important, because if we say, hey, we're going to put in place an ordinance, but we're not going to put it in place till mid-year, and then it's going to go 90 days, and then we'll have a permanent ongoing. You could imagine a flood of applications coming in earlier in order to beat the moratorium, which actually defeats the purpose of the moratorium. You could also imagine that if there's an outcry from the business industry, once they hear this moratorium's coming, even if it's not in place now, you'll start to hear that outcry and pushback anyway. So I'm not sure whether we buy ourselves anything there. I mean, that's my feeling. I know that I'm not the one that will be receiving those complaints, but I feel that I'm not convinced that we save anything by putting in place a longer moratorium. We can start it sooner and immediately shut it off so that we can figure out what do we want it to look like at the end of that moratorium. But I guess we'll ask Kevin if you can give some context on how long does it take and what does it take to actually implement the moratorium?
Thank you, Councilmember. Chair Kevin Fisher from the City Attorney's Office. First of all, there is, as Rachel and Chris alluded to, there is no magic number for how long you can have a moratorium. It can't be indefinite, obviously. And it's based on findings that there's a need to put a pause, like we've talked about. As far as how long it would take, we do have the ability to do urgency ordinances. So I think we could, as part of this process, we could look at whether the moratorium could be done as an urgency ordinance, which would cut out the, usually an ordinance is you have a first reading, a second reading, and then it becomes effective 30 days after. In the past, we've had the issue with moratoria, as you mentioned, Chair Cohen, when if they know it's coming, you'll get a flood of applications. There's really not a lot you can do about that other than, get the moratorium in place. So.
And I'm not concerned about that 30-day window. That's a typical process, right? I mean, we have a 30-day window. Also, we know we're not going to even be hearing this till August anyway, so we already know there's a few-month gap. I'm not suggesting it needs to be urgency and shorten that normal timeline. I guess I was just asking, is there some upfront work before it's introduced to council that has to be done?
The real work is with staff to come up with the basis for the findings.
basis of the findings,
we can certainly draft the ordinance and work with staff. So, the big laboring war is with staff. Yeah.
All right, well, I see you're looking, you want to weigh in?
I'm always paying attention. The other work that's in the early consideration form, and it's outlined in Manager's Budget Addendum 3, is the work around the smoke shops and the fines. So that is work that's supposed to be taking place this summer and coming to council when? Like in this fall, correct?
Yeah, so a number of different pieces. There was work on smoke shops that aren't TRL businesses that we were trying to sort of come up with that definition that falls into this. There's the broader work that council's directed on fines that were due to come back probably in August on increasing fines, and there was a very specific direction through the budget process. And so this is that's one of the items that gets impacted from a timeline perspective with this body of work.
Is that fines across all of code enforcement or just for the smoke shop industry?
It's across the whole thing.
Yeah, we were planning to, we've had a number of council direction regarding fines, so we're trying to wrap it all into that same work for August.
All right, I apologize for taking so long. I'll go on to Councilmember Kamei.
Thank you. I was just wondering, in order to create a pause and have this moratorium, we have to establish findings first, and then say at that time. So that's what would be coming in August, is that correct?
So we would have to do the work to make sure we have the evidence to substantiate the findings.
Okay.
To then bring the moratorium, hopefully in August, for your consideration.
Okay, so if we have those findings and, establish that, yes, in fact, as of September 1st, we're going to have a moratorium for a year, let's just hypothetically say, those findings, it's the work that has to be accumulated to establish those findings that you would bring in August.
Yes.
So that timeline then, in terms of what you were saying, Councilmember Ortiz, we would at least be able to say, hey, this information is coming in August, and we can establish, it sounds like the council can establish the time frame in which they want to do the pause. Is that correct?
Councilmember, I will caution a year might be a bit long, because it does need to be a reasonable time period. It's because it's a pause, and there have been moratoria that have gone longer, but the longer they go, the more susceptible we are to someone challenging it that we're dragging our feet.
Well,
basically.
I have no experience with moratoriums,
Yeah.
so I just kind of threw that out there.
Yeah, and
as a like 90 sounded too soon,
Yeah.
so I went to a year.
Maybe.
Whatever time frame seems appropriate. I think that if we have a time frame, I think that it would be helpful to be able to say, during this time frame, these are the things that we need to see, right? Because I know that in my district, one of the things that occurred to me was, how many smoke shops are in my district? I don't know, and so I'm actually having someone from my staff, take a look at that and see. I've gotten a lot of complaints in a very narrow area of my district, but, I'm sure we all have them. And so I think that, I think that if we establish, well, whether it's 6 months or whatever time frame it is that we establish is fine. It's just, I was thinking that I'd rather put the pieces in place so that we're not waiting around until,
Well, let me ask a clarifying question on Councilmember Kamei's question. You said you could bring that back in August. Your concern on this timeline was after the moratorium goes in place, how much time it will take, when you will have the time and capacity to do the work for the post-moratorium your concern wasn't the findings for the moratorium, or was it both?
It's both.
It is both. So there is a staffing question for the findings to bring the moratorium forward. And then there's the question of how long it takes, when's the right time for you to do the work to get us, to bring us out of the moratorium and into. So the length of the moratorium is one issue, the pre-moratorium is another. You suggested that if we pushed you, you could come back in August, but that was not your recommendation in this analysis.
That's correct. And there would likely be other workload implications and other priority implications, being the fine work that.
All right, we'll continue with questioning and then we'll come back around, but let's you want to say something else, Rachel?
I was just going to add that part of the work leading up to the moratorium is also, which we could do in parallel potentially, but is ensuring that we have sufficient staff, because we need resources to be able to go out and do enforcement on those businesses that will open up anyway despite the moratorium. So it's not so much the businesses that are in good faith coming into our office to try and get the permit, because those we will review and we will deny, and that's actually been quite successful with our current regulations, because they can't be within 500 feet of each other, and they can't be within 1,000 feet of sensitive uses. It's those businesses that are opening and not coming into the city. So we will still have to do that enforcement, even if the moratorium's in place.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go on to Councilmember Dewan.
Thank you, Chair. I just got a few questions. You mentioned a little bit earlier that the moratorium, if it's enacted, that you have to continue enforce with the new businesses. If there's no new businesses, there's nothing to monitor.
These are the businesses that would open up unlawfully.
But you are doing enforcement on them right now, as we speak, right? Or at least something.
To some degree, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's a complaint-based process, or if we happen to observe a business when we're out doing the other inspections.
What is, when you said in order to enact the moratorium, you have to define the finding, right? And give me a little more, elaborate a little bit more on the finding. How much has to be defined and in order to enact this? I mean, we've already know that smoke shop, smoking, vaping is not good. And we have 578, that is approximately 57 smoke shop per district. But I guarantee you, in District 5 and 7, it'll be a heck of a lot more. How much more finding do we need in order to justify this? We can justify by, hey, other city has done it. And I would imagine we probably have more smoke shop than some of the other city.
It might be a better question for the attorney's office to answer, but my understanding is with a moratorium, you have to substantiate the need, like the issue, the imminent concern that's affecting the community for why the moratorium is needed. So it's not that we don't think the support is there, but we just have to do our due diligence to provide that adequately. And any other city that's issued a moratorium would have done the same to enact that, is my understanding.
Kevin, can you elaborate?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. Rachel's correct, but so the moratorium, the city has the ability to impose a moratorium under its general police power. So basically, it's to protect the citizens. So in order to have a moratorium, we need to have the city council make findings that, go down the list of all the reasons that we need to put a pause on this. And, yes, it seems like it's pretty self-evident, but there is work to come up with the justification. How many smoke shops do we have? How many have opened? So there's some work that needs to go into it, and then ultimately it will be up to the council to say, yes, we think these are sufficient basis for us to impose a moratorium. And just going back to the time frame as well, I think when staff comes back, the length of the moratorium, I think, will be recommended by staff, and that length will be informed by how long it will take. Because the idea of a moratorium is you're putting a pause on while you do the work to do something permanent. So the recommended length of the moratorium should be informed by, staff's anticipation of how long it'll take to do the work. So it all kind of fits together. But you know, although it may seem initially like it's pretty straightforward, you know, there is some work that goes into, you know, coming up with the justification so that we have a legally defensible moratorium.
So the risk is that if we don't do a moratorium with enough justification, that somebody wants to open a shop would sue the city over the moratorium.
And try to poke holes in our justification. So yes.
So Kevin, is there a possibility where instead of moratorium, we can just set a limited amount of numbers of smoke shop in the city?
It's the same thing.
Same thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
by another name.
Couple more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because when we have a permit system like we do for smoke shops, we basically, the general rule is all comers, because the city's acting as regulatory. So if we want to put a limit on something that's otherwise as of right, if you come through the doors of City Hall, we have to have the justification to say, hey, public, you might otherwise be entitled to come in and get a permit, but because of these reasons, we have too many, so we're going to put a pause on it until we figure out, you know, a different system or a different way to regulate this. So that's the whole justification for it, is to take a pause, you know, put our thinking caps on and come up with a new system.
Is there a possibility to look at how many smoke shop is too many?
That would be part of the analysis.
Okay. And a couple of questions for Chris. I'm sorry, a little bit earlier you mentioned, not Chris, Rachel, you mentioned there's some funding from Decoy left. And can you move that funding in order to go ahead and do the finding so we can activate this moratorium?
Thank you, Councilmember. So yes, we'll be, we've already started the conversation with the county to understand if we can make an amendment to that grant. Because right now, you know, we have to conduct the work in alignment with the grant that's already been awarded to the city. So we would just have to go through the process to amend that agreement.
Okay. And how much is the overall hours or funding do you need in order to accomplish the finding? Do you have an estimate?
I don't currently have that estimate, but I do know with the current demands on our team, we're already not able to do our day-to-day for the TRL program, so it would be utilizing that extra resource and supplement to be able to do this work.
All right, thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Kind of a complicated issue. So we're really talking about when we can get this before council as a moratorium. And I understand that you need to bring in findings and develop the findings before we can make a decision on a moratorium. But I'm curious about the outreach component. At what time would you be doing the outreach with the current businesses, the community, and to what extent would the outreach, what would the outreach look like?
So normally the outreach would come at the point of a draft ordinance where we really understand what the parameters would be. And normally we would do notifications through, you know, letter correspondence, also, you know, a Zoom meeting or a community meeting type of thing. And then obviously take any, respond to any inquiries that we receive from the businesses and stakeholders.
Chris, you look like you're, no. Okay, you're leaning forward. You were leaning in, I didn't know. Does that mean it's after the moratorium or before it comes to council, when it comes to council as a draft? In which case, I don't think we should have an emergency ordinance if we're not doing the outreach until the ordinance is coming as a draft to council.
I was referring to an internal draft. So when staff has developed the draft ordinance, we would then vet it with the stakeholders and get feedback and that kind of thing in case there's any adjustments.
But just to clarify, the ordinance meaning the ordinance, not the moratorium, but the longer term ordinance that comes at the end, right?
Well, the moratorium.
So you need to do outreach before the moratorium ordinance as well? Or is the outreach for the process that occurs to determine what happens after the moratorium?
We typically would. We haven't discussed whether or not we would eliminate that step.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, really just the question of outreach is, you know, a best practice. It's not sort of a requirement per se. But, you know, this is an issue that is likely to get contentious, right? There's a number of business owners that are going to have concerns around this. We have a 7-Eleven currently that, you know, went through a fire. They let their TRL lapse. And in that time, you know, in that time we'd enacted the changes that they were now too close to a school, and now we can't issue them a new license, right? So those are the types of situations we get into, as it's not just those new businesses looking to open, but existing businesses that run the sort of the potential of not being able to renew that license.
Well, that's why I brought up outreach, because I think engagement of not just the community who wants to see the restriction on the tobacco sales, which I support, by the way, but we also need to communicate with the businesses who might be impacted by this and get their input, because what will happen as we get closer to it coming to council, we're all going to get reached. People are going to reach out to us, lobbyists are going to reach out to us, and they're going to say, why did you not let us know about this ahead of time? Why did you not bring us into this discussion so we could figure out what works, what accomplishes what your goal is, but also doesn't stop, you know, Rotten Robbie from selling cigarettes at their gas station that they already sell. That I'm just throwing that out there. So as far as the timing is concerned, it doesn't sound like, does that add, that adds a complication to the moratorium ordinance, but can it be in, I guess my basic question is, when does the outreach occur? Before it comes to council?
Yeah, typically we would do outreach. And again, depending on the timeline, depends on how extensive that outreach is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so when I heard that concern about renewal. The renewal is for ones that have lapsed, because we could put a moratorium in on new ones and not renewals. But if one lapsed, then it's considered a new application. So that's that sort of outlier case that causes more problems with the moratorium. Is that the correct assessment of what you said?
Correct.
Okay. So given all of this and all these questions that we've asked, what is a reasonable timeline that doesn't, you know, delay this indefinitely, but doesn't so overburden you that something else we've asked you to do gets dropped? Right. I mean, we'd like to move it forward. You can hear their urgency. We'd like to move forward as quick as possible, but I don't think any of us want to say, well, then stop doing the other thing that we've already directed you to do as a council. What's a reasonable time to bring it back to council that's not so indefinite that it frustrates us?
So to not impact the immediate work on re-engineering, probably October would be.
And if you came in October with the moratorium, we could implement the moratorium within a month of that date, and then you would tell us at that time how long the moratorium has to be to do the actual work, and the moratorium could last 3 months, 6 months, maybe 9, I don't know, whatever is reasonable legally, so that you have the time to do the full work for the ordinance that then comes back at the end of that moratorium.
Correct.
Okay, I think we can craft a motion from that information. Would you like to try? Or, I mean, I can do it, but go ahead. Or go ahead. Okay. Okay, then I'll craft it. I usually don't craft it as a chair of the meeting, but all right, I'll move that we move forward with this memo to bring back a moratorium in October with the findings necessary, and also with a timeline plan for the length of the moratorium in order to come back, in order to, plan for beyond the moratorium.
An appropriate outreach.
No, to council. No, back to full
And
council.
appropriate outreach.
Including appropriate outreach.
I'll second that.
Okay. Do you want to make another comment? Okay, yeah, you don't, go ahead.
Yeah. It kind of, I understand the need to, have, like, the staff and everything, but I don't know, October to me seems like far away. You know, like, can we say no later than? Because if they're able to bring it back in September, come on, you know, this thing, you know, like,
I'm happy to
I
amend the motion to say no later than October, but I know how this works. When it's no later
As a
than October,
seconder, I
it'll be
will
October,
accept
but
that as well.
that's
But
fine.
but that's okay. I mean,
Because,
certainly
you know,
you hear that we'd like it as soon as possible. October, while it seems far away, in the timeline of council that we're, you know, with the recess in July, not even having meetings till August, isn't as far away as we think it is. But I certainly agree if we can get it sooner, we'd be happy to have it sooner. Okay. Appreciate it.
Give them more staff.
Let's, let's move on to a vote then on that. All right, the motion carries 5-0. Thanks for bearing with us during the conversation. Appreciate Councilmember Ortiz leading on this, and we are now on to open forum.
Jordan?
Jordan Moldow, District 3. I just wanted to talk about how the council agendas are structured, because I'm sure you know they're very confusing, especially for members of the public, especially for members of the public who are maybe attending their first council meeting. How the hell do you look at this and figure out what order the agenda items are actually going to be heard in? You know, you start with 1, then you go to orders of the day, then 2, and then you jump down to 10 sometimes, but not all the time. 3.2 you actually hear in the morning, and then you've got all the like won't be heard until whatever. It's just crazy confusing. And as far as I've been to like public meetings for VTA, MTC, I've been to the other council committee meetings, and I'm not aware of any other body that orders the agendas in the way that our city council orders the agendas. And all the others that I'm aware of, they just list the items in the order that they're going to hear them, and they go to top to bottom. Sometimes things have to be reordered, and that's fine, but our agenda is literally never in order, and it is very difficult to figure out. When I go and look at the agenda, one of the first things I do is Control F for the word heard, so that I can see what the actual order is going to be. And I assume the mayor has a script that is actually ordered in the correct order, so why can't that just be the way that we structure our agendas? I understand that it seems like you wanted to group things under different council focus areas, but maybe there's a different way to accomplish that goal while making the agendas more intuitive to your average resident. Thank you.
Back to the committee.
All right, thank you for the comment. Meeting's adjourned at 2:53. See you in August.